Hello, church family. Welcome to today's Sunday school lesson. We are in session 5 entitled Our Relationships, and we're going to be in 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 1 through 12. And our key idea this week is believers live out their faith in the context of relationships, meaning everything we do is involved with there are relationships involved. No matter where you are in the church, no matter where you are in life, our lives are and our faith are tangled up in relationships with others and also with the Lord Jesus. But today we're specifically looking at relationships and relationships between husbands and wives and church members and people. And so, what are some reasons that you might get frustrated with other people? For me, I get really frustrated when someone does not read emails. I'll send an email to whomever, and if the person doesn't read the email and then they show up and talk to me and go, hey, are we doing this thing, or when are we doing this thing? And I have already sent an email, and it frustrates me when people don't read emails. But there are things that we get frustrated with one another with. We are human, and husbands and wives get frustrated with one another. Church members will get frustrated with one another for whatever reason. Family members will get frustrated with each other. But church and marriage both involve relationships. Believers must live out their faith in the context of these relationships. This requires that we learn how to resolve conflict and to deepen our relationships so that we can live in the way that God intended for our good and for His glory. So those who read this week's Bible passage may wonder why Peter would address wives in 6 verses and husbands in only 1. Well, first of all, verses did not exist in the original writing. Peter wasn't writing verse 1, this happened. Verse 2, this is what you do next. Verse 3. No, those were added later by editors and by translators so that we could more easily reference each line of the Bible. Each line of the Bible has been independently indexed. And if you've ever used a Bible software, and I'm not sure how many people do this, but even words in translations have been indexed and translated. So in my Bible software, I can go to whatever word and whatever verse and click on it, and it will tell me what that Greek word is in the original or in the copies of the original manuscripts that we have. And so I can see what that translation would be back to the Hebrew or back to the Greek. And so we have that. So these verses didn't exist. But second, the content of the wives occurred in the context of a patriarchal society where males did have dominance over females. It wasn't an equal society like what we have today. Peter did not endorse that system, but he wrote into it to the culture, and that's for us to then interpret and break down and see how that applies to us today in 2025. So his concern in writing these was to help those living in situations. He's not condoning the situation, but if you're in the situation, here's how you ought to live. So just in the same way that he taught slaves how to submit to their masters, he was teaching wives how to submit to their husbands, and he actually advances the case against this kind of injustice in society. So he is going to speak to husbands. It is small. Paul also talks to husbands in Ephesians. Ephesians chapter 5, he says, wives, listen to your husbands, and husbands, love your wives as Christ loves the church. And I like to remind people that word submit does not mean to roll over and not defend yourself. It just means that in something where one person has has an idea about a decision and the other has a decision about an idea, or an idea about a decision, if they are both godly, if they are both well thought out and logical, then the structure of the family is the husband, the male, has the final say. Now, if the husband has the final say and makes a bad decision, then yes, the wife should and ought to try to correct that. I believe in that. If I make a bad decision, I expect Grace to either hold me accountable to it or what have you. And I'm going to do my best to make sure, as Peter says, honor your wives, to make sure that every decision I make honors my wife. And we're going to talk about all that. So there, starting in verse 1, in the same way, wives, submit yourself to your own husband, so that even if some disobey the word, they may be won over without a word by the way their wives lived. So right off the bat, if the man is disobeying the word, the wife should live in such a way that it wins her husband back over. Be an example. When they observe your pure, reverent lives, don't let your beauty consist of outward things like elaborate hairstyles and wearing gold jewelry or fine clothes, but rather what is inside the heart, the imperishable quality of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is of great worth in God's sight. For in the past, the holy women who put their hope in God also adorned themselves this way, submitting to their own husbands, just as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord. You have become her children when you do what is good and do not fear any intimidation. Husbands, in the same way, live with your wives in an understanding way, as with a weaker partner, showing them honor as co-heirs, not subservient, not subordinate, but co-heirs of the grace of life, that your prayers will not be hindered. Finally, all of you be like-minded and sympathetic, love one another, and be compassionate and humble, not paying back evil for evil or insult for insult, but on the contrary, giving a blessing, since you were called for this, so that you may inherit a blessing. For the one who wants to love life and see good days, let him keep his tongue from evil and his lips from speaking deceit, and let him turn away from evil and do what is good. Let him seek peace and pursue it, because the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are open to their prayer, but the face of the Lord is against those who do what is evil. So let's first look at our first section, which is entitled Wives, and this is verses 1 through 6. And like I said, there are a lot of verses here, more 6-1 really, of verses to wives versus verses to husband. But he is giving some ways that wives can be submissive and therefore obedient to the Lord, and therefore if they have a disobedient or unbelieving husband, that they might win their husband over for the Lord and for the gospel. So first off, how does a wife's role in marriage reflect her relationship with God? Well, let's read verses 1 through 6 and answer that question afterward. In the same way, wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands, so that even if some disobey the word, so that some disbelieve the word or do not believe in the Lord, or rejects the word, that's how that word disobey can also be translated. And then with the phrase, the word, Peter's actually using a play on words. Those disobedient to the word, to the gospel, may be won to Christ by the wife not even saying a word, by her quiet obedience, quiet faith to the Lord, and her example that should and might win her husband over to the gospel. Verse 2, when they observe your pure, reverent lives, don't let your beauty consist of outward things like elaborate hairstyles and wearing gold jewelry or fine clothes, but rather what is inside the heart, the imperishable quality of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is of great worth in God's sight. For in the past, the holy women who put their hope in God and also adorn themselves this way, submitting to their own husbands, just as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord. You have become her children when you do what is good and do not fear any intimidation. So first off, there in verse 3, beauty, this is the Greek noun cosmos, usually referring to the world or the universe, but here it's simply there to imply adornment. It suggests making beautiful or arranging or putting something in order. This is the word used when God created the universe. He created the cosmos. That's what that would be translated into, and how he organized it and how he arranged it. So don't let your organization, your adornment, consist of outward things, like elaborate hairstyles and wearing gold jewelry or fine clothes, but rather focus on what is in the heart. Make sure your heart is beautiful and adorned by the things of God, not your hair, not your jewelry, not your makeup, not your clothing. Don't use outwardly things to make yourself look richer than you are, I think is what Peter's saying here. Here, be humble and make sure your heart is beautiful first. Skipping down to verse 6, that word Lord can also be translated as sir or master. This is going back to the story of Abraham and Sarah when they were in Egypt, and Abraham gave Sarah some instructions, and she was referring to him as Lord. This was also true throughout their lives, even when things went wrong and Abraham made some bad decisions, and Sarah's righteousness, Sarah, held her husband accountable to some things. And then that word intimidation there at the end of verse 6 is an indirect reference to Proverbs 3:25 and 26. When a people are obedient and trust God, they don't need to live in fear. So if you look at Proverbs 3:25 and 26, just pull that up very quickly. And here we go. Do not be afraid of sudden terror, nor of trouble from the wicked when it comes, for the Lord will be your confidence and will keep your foot from being caught. So if you are obedient, you don't have to worry about intimidation. So what does all this mean about a wife's role in marriage, and how does it reflect her relationship with God? Well, if a wife is committed to the Lord, then she will submit to her husband because God's will is, and God has ordained that marriage, and so he has placed that husband in that relationship to be in charge. But if that husband is disobedient, then this is how wives ought to behave, and her acting like this would be a sign of her faith in the Lord. This would be her spiritual worship, her act of spiritual worship, as Paul talks about living as living sacrifices. That's what this would be. And is that easy? No. Is that hard to think about in 2025 when men and women ought to be equal? Yes, that's hard. But what this means is that wives need to lead quietly, not disrespectfully, and that they need to, yes, hold their husbands accountable. I would, like I said earlier, I would fully expect Grace to hold me accountable if I was failing in some way. But it does not negate the place of the father, the husband in the family dynamic, except for when that husband is being truly abusive. This is speaking to a loving relationship. This is not speaking about a husband who is domineering, who is controlling, who is abusive in any way. This is a healthy relationship with a husband who is disobedient or rejecting the word, an unbelieving husband. Because I believe that there are plenty of husbands out there who are unbelievers, who love their wives dearly and are not are not believers, but still are good husbands from an earthly standpoint. So then Peter speaks to the husbands, and we actually have 3 questions here in this section, whereas we only had one about wives. So verse 7, husbands, in the same way, live with your wives in an understanding way as with a weaker partner. Understand that you are there to be her caretaker, to take care of her, to guard her, to be her shelter, to be her security, to be her confidant, and her comforter, and all of these things that husbands are designed to lead as and do this well, because God has created you to do that. That is your job as the physically larger, physically stronger partner in marriage. That is your responsibility. This reference to the weaker partner is not talking about intellectually or emotionally or spiritually maturity. It is literally talking about physical strength. And just to speak about this a little bit, Grace goes to the gym far more often than me. She goes to the gym about 3 or 4 times a week, lifting weights. I can go to the gym 1 time a week, and I can lift more weight for longer than her without really trying. I've gone to the gym with her before, and her personal trainer was having her lift. I don't remember how much it was, but I walked over, and just to kind of showboat and just be a turd, I grabbed the bar from her and I started doing it with one hand. I hadn't really worked out in forever, but I am naturally bigger and stronger than my wife, and it's my job to use that to protect her and to take care of her, not to use it to hold myself above her or to put her in her place. That is not what that is for. God has made us like this. God has made man and woman like this so that man can have a helper and a mate who can love him and support him and be beside him in everything he does. And God has made husbands, men, to protect their wives, to protect them and guard them and provide for them throughout their lives. That's what the partnership is for. And then the second half of verse 7, showing them honor as co-heirs, equals, is what that word ought to be translated as or interpreted as, of the grace of life, so that your prayers will not be hindered. So notice that if you do not show honor to your wives, your prayers will not be heard, or they will be slowed down getting to the Father. So if you are being disobedient and you are not honoring your wife well, God is not going to hear your prayers. He only hears the prayers of the righteous, and that is a way to be unrighteous, is to dishonor your wife. So why are husbands called to honor their wives? Because we are in charge, but our wives are still equal to us. And what does that look like? What does honoring one's wife look like? It means listening to her when she has a lot to tell you about her day. It means putting your phone aside, turning off the TV, stopping whatever chore you're doing. While that might seem like, gosh, if you just let me finish, babe, I'd listen. No, listen to her then. I know this because I'm guilty of that, of, hold on, let me finish this. No, put it down. She's more important than whatever is going on. I think the the exception to the rule would be is if you're cleaning or working on a toilet that is overflowing, that might take precedence over stopping because you don't want to ruin your house. But honoring your wife means putting her before everything else, her needs before your own needs. And so then what is the connection between unhealthy relationships and hindered prayers? Well, like I said, if you are not doing your part as a man, as a husband in your relationships, in your marriage, then you are going to not experience not answered prayers, heard prayers. God's not even going to listen to them until you get your relationship with your wife back under the level it should be. And so this one verse, even though it's only marked down as one verse, as we said, he's only saying a little bit to men. He's speaking more strongly to men here. The consequence for dishonoring your wife is far greater than the responsibility of wives to submit to husbands. If you are trying to lead your family and your prayers aren't being answered because you're dishonoring your wife, then not only are you dishonoring your wife, but your prayers aren't being answered. So therefore, your blessings aren't going to be as prevalent because God's not hearing those. So you might not get the job interview you want. You might not. You might have a dryer that goes out. That happened today. Our dryer went out today, and I've worked on it. And I don't know of any dishonoring of my wife that I've done in the last week, but sometimes that can be what God does. Is He's going to put objects or obstacles in your path because of ways that you've been disobedient. So maybe I've done something wrong, and that's causing this dryer to have problems because it was fine earlier this week. There's no problem with it. So it could be that. So unhealthy relationships can hinder our prayers. And then finally, Peter speaks to all believers, verses 8 through 12. Finally, all of you, not just husbands and wives, not just children, but everyone, the whole church, be like-minded, be of the same mind, be single-minded, about the Lord, about the church, be on the same page. This is the unity of mind, or one mind in the King James Version. And this is relating to harmony, and it only appears here in the New Testament. This is the only time this word appears, is here in 1 Peter chapter 3. Love one another and be compassionate and humble, not paying back evil for evil or insult for insult, but on the contrary, giving a blessing, since you were called for this, so that you may inherit a blessing. So if someone is rude to you, don't be rude back. Don't get frustrated back. If you're irritated with somebody, treat them with kindness anyway, because that is what we're called for. And if you give a blessing, you might inherit a blessing. For the one who wants to love life and see good days, let him keep his tongue from evil and his lips from speaking deceit. So don't lie. Don't say a bad word about another person. And let him turn away from evil and do what is good. Let him seek peace and pursue it, because the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous and his ears are open to their prayer. But the face of the Lord is against those who do what is evil. So how should you respond when others do not treat you well? Say things like, well, I'm sorry I've done this. I'm sorry I've upset you in this way. And say that you appreciate their concerns. Say you appreciate their position on something. And then do your best to mend that relationship however you can. And I'm not telling you to be a doormat. So don't be a doormat. But also pick and choose your battles. Don't choose a bad hill to die on. And so if that is someone who is just a thorn in your side, who frustrates you all the time, we all have these people in our lives. Be kind, be gracious to those people. So why is the instruction to demonstrate love and humility vital to the local church? Because we are all human. We are all going to be wrong at some point. We are all going to fail at some point. We're all going to mess up or say the wrong thing or make somebody mad at some point. And if we want people to treat us with humility and love and respect when we mess up, then when others mess up against us, we ought to be the same way. We ought to be loving and humble about it, and making sure that we stand in unity rather than division, because a divided church is one that Satan loves to play in. He loves to divide churches and cause them to fall. And we need to guard ourselves against that every step of the way. So I hope this is a good challenge to you and encouragement to you to be a good wife, be a good husband, be a good church member. If you have an issue with another church member, go to that person and sort it out. Pray for God. Pray that God will help you be united with those people and in your lives. We all have them. I'm sure you could name them. I'm sure I could name them. I'm not going to. But if there are folks like this that you have taken an issue with, if you have a husband or a wife who is not doing their job, go to them gently and hash this out and be kind and united with one another so that we can be blessed because of our relationships with one another. Thank you so much for being with me. I look forward to worshiping with you very soon. Bye-bye.